here. As I said, I'm with the Southern Association of Independent Schools, and my organization, like some of yours, we've been virtual for 5 years. But I found that once the rest of the world went virtual, things changed in the way we operated. Because as you all mentioned, doing this all day is like being on all day, and it's just exhausting. Um, so how we know the transition to the next normal will be challenging, and want to talk about how we can best prepare ourselves, and as some of you mentioned, your members too. So we asked the wonderful Erin Meadows to join us today. For those of you who don't know her, she is a certified professional coach and leadership consultant, and the founder of Cause Collaboration, which is a company dedicated to helping organizations and the people in them thrive. Her favorite part of coaching is helping people, teams, and organizations achieve things they once thought were not possible. So Erin, we have some things that might have once been considered impossible that we have done in the last year and that we'll be doing going forward. So thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. And so speaking of impossible, I have been doing, I can't even tell you how many presentations during this time period, and my slides are not pulling up. So I think Jenny is actually going to share the slides for me if she has them. This is a first for me. Zoom is not cooperating. But I'm just going with it. Nothing bothers me anymore, really, when it comes to this stuff. So here we go. Okay. And Jenny, I've got some animations. Just fly through them and just make the whole screen whole. You don't have to, I'm not going to prompt you along the way. So here we are, and we are preparing for lack of a better term, re-entry. We're really starting to think about what comes next. And when we think about what comes next, that can feel a little overwhelming because I don't know about you, but I'm still wondering what just actually happened. Now, I want to pause here and say, I'm not going to tell you what just happened in COVID terms. This is not yet another COVID presentation. But here's what I will say. When we look at our next slide, we just see some pictures. And what this tells us is we've been through a lot, we've given up a lot, we've lost a lot. But on our next slide, I want to represent that we've actually seen a lot of resilience in ourselves, in our friends and families, our communities, our members, our colleagues. And finally, we have to tip our hats to the unlikely heroes that have actually emerged over the last year to make us laugh, to keep us busy, to keep our minds off things. So a lot has happened, but what I really want to share with you is what really happened behind the scenes. Now, I do mindset coaching. So when I say behind the scenes, I mean in our minds. What we've actually been through is a massive change management process that none of us, exactly none of us, opted into. Now, I don't know how many of you all have done change management in your organizations, but if you've even done it on the slightest scale, you know the fastest way to screw it up is to not allow people to opt into it, to not make them a part of it, and to just hit them with it and tell them to adapt. That's exactly what the last year has been for us. So let's have some fun with science and take a quick look at our brains, because I want us to understand exactly what our brains are going through, because the same thing we just went through is what we're going to go through with reentry, because our brains have just gotten used to what's been going on. And now we're saying to our brains, so we're about to go back to something that feels familiar, but is also totally not familiar at all. So when we look at our brains, we have the neocortex, and that's the rational thinking part of our brain. And this part of our brain loves repetition and habit. That's been taken away from us in a lot of ways. This is just how the brain is wired. So this part of our brain craves to see our world exactly the way it was yesterday. So anytime change is introduced, let alone massive change, it's like giving this part of our brain a really intense workout. The next part of our brain that we're probably pretty familiar with because it shows up a lot in our lives is the reptilian brain, or our primitive brain. So this part of our brain keeps its job by constantly scanning for death, despair, and destruction. This is what the part of our brain that kept our ancestors from getting eaten by the woolly mammoths. So on a normal, bright, sunny day, this part of our brain makes a whole bunch of stuff up and exaggerates a lot of things and the thoughts that it provides us to keep its job. But over the last year, this was like the reptilian's brain time to shine. There has actually been legitimately scary things happening. Now, when the neocortex and the reptilian brain are kind of freaking out and doing what they do, our limbic brain shows up and it shoots out a whole bunch of emotions. And so if you click again, you'll see all the emotions. Yes. And so here's what I want to offer you. We have been through a lot of change. And if it has felt massively up and down and big and emotional for you and everyone around you, your brain is actually doing what it was built to do. We are actually getting through this because we're functioning, we're learning to function with change. So let's play two truths and a lie, shall we? One of my favorite games. All right, so our first one here is change is actually the only constant. It was always there. We just didn't feel it like this, and it's always going to continue. My next statement I'll share with you is that the things that have supported us through this pandemic are actually going to be our toolkit for re-entry. We actually have the tools we need to successfully re-enter when that time comes. And finally, re-entry is going to be super simple, so smooth, without error, and tons of fun. So feel free to drink if you're drinking, because let's be honest, it's that kind of world we're living in. If you figured out that the last one was the lie. Yes, cheers. Yeah, we're going to have some bumps along the way. Our brains are still going to adjust to change the way they have been, and nothing's going wrong. If we go into this knowing that it's going to still be a little bumpy and we don't let ourselves convince ourselves that we're screwing everything up, we're going to do all right with re-entry. So what I've put together for you is we're going to look at what I think are 5 tips for really successful re-entry. First is clarity. Then we're going to talk about communication, consistency, awareness, and self-regulation. So let's jump right into it and take a look at clarity. So when we think about clarity, the first place I want us to start is by asking ourselves, what is normal anyway? So you are probably hearing a lot of people say, and you're even thinking it yourself, I'm sure, I can't wait for things to get back to normal. We've got to get ready for the new normal. And what I want to offer up is normal, although there's a textbook definition, actually means very different things to each one of us. My normal is going to be very different from your normal. We also have to understand that normal wasn't actually working for everyone before. This goes beyond just the pandemic. We've learned a lot in the last year. There are systems that we once considered normal that actually weren't serving massive groups of people. And so normal might not work now. And as I think about this, I have to say, I'm not interested in going back. To me, that would be really sad, actually, that we go through all of this as human beings and as organizations and just opt to fall right back into what we were doing and to not bring forward any of the lessons we've learned and put them into place. So we want to be really aware of what normal actually is to each one of us. So the best way to find out what normal is would be to ask the question. So one of the things that I do is I love to explore people's language. So when someone talks to me about normal, returning to normal, I'll just say, tell me what you mean. What does normal mean to you? So at the individual level, when I think of normal, we're probably saying, I just want to feel safe and comfortable, and I want a stable routine. I don't know about you all, but I'd like to be a little less hyper vigilant. I'd love to go to Publix and not wonder if that's going to be the grocery trip that kills me. And that is like legitimately have been some of my thoughts. Normal might mean I just want to see my people more often, or I want to see them for the first time in over a year. At the organizational level, we have to ask the same question. What do we mean when we say return to work, new normal, normal? Does that mean we just want to start using the office we're paying rent on? Does that mean we're ready to resume travel and we can't wait to do that? We want to resume meetings and our programming. We want to see our members in person. Like, how many of you all have really not been able to see your members in person? Or for some organizations, normal might actually mean we are ready to get into financial recovery. So to get clarity, I want you to get clear about what reentry and normal means to you and to your organization. So the next piece of this puzzle of clarity would be to capture your lessons learned. So again, we had to learn the lessons. Let's capture them. So, and Jenny, you can just open them all up here. What worked? What didn't? How did you innovate and pivot? How did you meet your own needs as a human being and the needs of others, the needs of your friends, your families, your colleagues, your members? Capture those lessons learned. And here's a little bonus tip. Hopefully you're going to update your crisis plans, your business continuity plans. We're never going to get caught by a pandemic again, ever, because now we know. When you capture the lessons learned for reentry, that just slides right into your continuity plan. So you're creating it once and you're going to use it in multiple places. So capturing your lessons learned, a great way to do this is to ask yourself some questions. So on our next slide here, let's look at these 3 questions. When you go through all of this, you can get really clear about what you want to resume, continue, and release. These are great questions to ask yourself, your friends, your family, and to actually go through with your team on the organizational level. So what were we doing before COVID that's absolutely something we want to go back and do again. We've missed it. We felt the pain of it being gone. We cannot wait to resume this. That is going to show back up when we re-enter the world. Then ask yourself, what did we start doing or what did we start doing differently during COVID that we absolutely want to continue? We had never thought about it before, but we've decided this actually works. Like for me, I've been in nature more in the last year than I probably have in the last 10. I plan to continue that. In my business, I've stopped letting things like my Zoom not working properly for a presentation freaking me out. A year ago, this probably would have really messed with me when this happened today. I plan to continue not being bothered by the little things. And then what are you willing and ready to release? What were you doing or engaging in or creating in your organizations before COVID that have really not been missed, or in your life that you're ready to leave it in the past? This is a great time to question if something needs to be sunsetted. Was there a networking event that absolutely no one missed? Don't put it back on your calendar then. If nobody wants it, don't make them do it. In your life, are there relationships and obligations and commitments in your personal life that you had that you've decided you don't want to pick them back up? We actually don't have to resume everything that we did. We can opt in and out. We always could. Now it's just we're acutely aware that we have that choice. So this is a great set of questions to ask yourself and your organizations. So next, we're going to look at one really important piece of information. Anytime you're getting ready for reentry, you're going to make new agreements with yourself and the people around you. And I really want you to know that when people start negotiating with you about new agreements, nothing is going wrong. Nothing is falling off the rails. This is to be expected and normal. So this could look like having a conversation with your partner about you are absolutely not going to resume doing trash duty. Like your partner was able to handle it for a year. They can keep doing it now. But this is also going to show up in your organizations around creating new agreements about more flexible work styles. We've proven for a year we can be flexible. Let's not kid ourselves. That's going to come up and we're going to have to navigate that. So be prepared for that along the way. All right. Then what you do is you actually take it and put pen to paper and develop a reentry strategy. You do not want to do this in a silo. You should never do any strategy in a silo, but you really want this to be top down, side to side for your organization. And even if you're putting a strategy together for what it looks like for your family. And here is why you don't want to do this in a silo. People want to be seen, heard, and understood. These are non-negotiables. People want to know that you see them, you hear their input and feedback, and you understand where they're coming from. If you only sit around the table with 3 people on your leadership team and create a strategy for reentry and just disseminate it, people will not feel seen, heard, and understood. They will feel locked out of the process, and it will make it harder for everyone. Same thing with little people in your lives. Of course, we have to talk to them in little people language, and we can't share everything with everyone all the time, but you do want to include people so they do feel like they're a part of the process. So after you have gotten clear about pulling the right people in, then you continue to develop this strategy, and you can share it all there, Jenny. You want it to be clear, concise, and consistent. You're going to have to create your reentry strategy based on what you know now. And you're going to have to do it knowing that what you know today might change tomorrow. And it's got to be focused on what you can control. I think a lot of people haven't started thinking about this because they're waiting for the day they have all the information to put the perfect reentry strategy into place. That's never going to happen. The perfect reentry strategy is one that you're talking about right now, and one that you're building knowing you're going to need to change it along the way. All right. So while you've done your reentry strategy and you've already done all of that work, I want you to consider these things. Reentry on your personal life, think about it. You might go back to work, but travel might feel different for you. So have these conversations: school, childcare, routines and responsibilities, those new agreements, social engagements. You might feel comfortable going back to work and still not comfortable going to a wedding, for example. So get really clear in your family what that looks like. Organization-wide, this is where you're going to pull into your group. Obviously, lots of people on your team, HR, legal, you're going to talk about plans and timelines. I think we're really going to come back in waves for lots of reasons. You're going to definitely need to update policies and procedures, your safety protocols. Absolutely, and we'll dig into this a little bit later. We need to be talking about beefing up employee support because there's a mental health component to what's happened this year, and that is going to walk right back into the workplace. So now that you've got a reentry strategy, why not take all that good work, reverse engineer it, and go ahead and develop a re-exit strategy by following all of the same rules? And here's why. We have tried to re-enter once before and quickly had to pull the troops back out. It is possible we might have a couple of false starts. I want you to do this for a few reasons. One, if you take the time to do your re-exit strategy right now, that just slides over to your business continuity plan. If you ever have to deal with something like this in the future, you just pull that over. This is when we know we would need to pull our people out of the office. This is when we know we would need to stop travel. So that informs the update to your crisis planning. The second reason I want you to really have a re-exit strategy laid out is because the people in your organization and the people in your lives are going to not only need to be confident that you have been thoughtful of when and how you ask them to come back, they need to know that you are thoughtful of when and how and what would trigger you asking people to leave again. No one's going to feel comfortable going into something if they don't think that their organization has been thoughtful of how they'd be pulled back out of it. So that's just going to help make it more comfortable for everyone. All right. So we have talked a little bit about clarity. Now we move into communication with everyone all the time, as much as we can do it. That's what we need to be doing right now. I think this is a tool we've developed, maybe even overused in the last year, but let's look at it from a different perspective here. So let's go back to our brain. When our brains have a lack of information, our reptilian brain starts to fill in the blanks with the most nightmarish, worst possible versions of what could be happening. And then it causes a whole bunch of feelings that make us go into protection mode. And then we start showing up based on a story that may or may not be true and engaging with each other in that. So I want you to think about the time you had to email your boss some not so great news and you hit send, and then 30 minutes later, no response. And all of a sudden your brain went, excuse me. And then an hour later, no response. And then your brain's like, oh, this is not good. And then an hour and a half later, your brain is like, I think you should just stop working altogether and pull your resume out and probably go ahead and list your house because you've not gotten a response. And that surely means you're going to lose your job and lose your home and your whole life is going to be over. That's the reptilian brain, how it talks to you. Same thing here. When we don't give people in our lives, when we don't give people in our organizations good, clear, consistent, concise information, our brains just start doing this. So here's another non-negotiable. People want information and they want time to prepare. And to me, there's no excuse to not do this. It makes it harder on us as individuals, and it is going to absolutely cause chaos for organizations. So I'm going to share with you something from my former career. So before I became a coach and a consultant, I spent 20 years in marketing and media relations and PR, and I did a lot of crisis communication work. And in crisis communication, there are 5 tenets. And in these tenets, if you follow them, the thought is you'll come out on the other end of the crisis far better than if you don't follow them. When I look at these tenets, not only do they apply right now for re-entry and for everything that's happening, I actually think anyone who communicates this way regularly in their normal life is going to have far stronger relationships, way less confusion, and a lot more success. So let's look at these one at a time. So the first one here is going to be, you want to be prompt and consistent. So I want you to think about when a crisis breaks out, the worst thing an organization could do is to ignore it for days or weeks or even hours. Same thing here. When re-entry conversations start, and you'll know they're starting because you'll hear it, and you'll hear it kind of just happening casually on like in Zoom meetings and things like that. I want you to be prompt. I want you to get out ahead of it. Same in your homes. I want you to get out ahead of it when your children start asking questions or people that you might be a caregiver for, and be consistent. So you don't just come out quickly and make a statement and share information and then go away for 3 months. That's not how it works. So go ahead and be consistent about your reentry plans. The next one is be compassionate. We are talking about human beings. Yes, we are also talking about organizations, but organizations are run by human beings. And so we have to show that our organizations have a heartbeat. We have to show that we are compassionate and understanding and aware of the human experience. The third one here is going to be that you need to be honest always. Now, a lot of people get tripped up on honesty and communication because they're afraid to say they don't have all the answers. So instead of admitting they don't have the answers, they just start making things up. We see this in crisis communication all the time. We also see this in organizations, and I'm going to help you navigate that. So I want you to be honest about where you're at in reentry planning, where you think you're headed, and what you know. Next, you're going to want to be informative. So not a lot of fluff, not a lot of legalese. People don't need 100-page document reentry plans. We want this to just be very simple and informative. Our brains are in overload already. So we really just want to make sure that we are spelling things out really simply and really clearly. And finally, it needs to be interactive. So it needs to be an ongoing two-way conversation. So it's not a memo. It's not one town hall meeting with only 5 minutes for questions. It is a complete open conversation that can start and stop at any time. Now, when you think about this in your home life, all of these tenets would apply and work so well in conversations with people in our personal lives, just being really open and honest and informative about where you're at, why or why not you're going to go on the family vacation or to the family reunion this summer. Get really open in that communication. So with that in mind, we are going to practice preparing to answer the unanswerable. I see it over and over again. The reason people get hung up is we have actually convinced ourselves that it is a bad thing to not have all the answers, to not know something. So this is something I taught in media relations training, and it is going to work for anyone who's going to have to answer questions about reentry in their lives or in their organizations. So the first thing you can say to someone is you can actually just say you don't have the answer. I think people underestimate the power of just saying, I don't have an answer. Think about what I just told you about your brain. That gives the brain something to process. It's like, oh, Erin actually doesn't have the answer, but she's going to get one and follow up. Now my brain can rest versus me hemming and hawing and making it all weird and awkward or just ignoring the question. Then my brain goes to work to fill in the blanks and to kind of tidy things up. You can say we're working on that and we'll follow up as soon as we have information. You can also admit that you're processing everything too. I wish I had an answer for you. I'm actually processing that as well. Let me circle back. So you are capable of talking about reentry even though you don't have all the answers. And everyone in your life wants to have the conversation with you. All right. So again, when we start communicating, it's not just when we're planning, but when we start rolling this out further and further to more and more people, we're going to have to create some new agreements as well. So we might create some agreements when we're getting clear and we're strategizing. We're absolutely, when we really start talking about it and seeing how reentry is shaping up, we're going to create some new agreements there too. And again, nothing's going wrong. Walk into it with this expectation, and then you'll know, hey, that woman Erin told us to be ready to make a new agreements. Everything's going according to plan. We can have these conversations and survive them. All right. So the next area we're going to focus on is consistency. Now, I told you earlier that our brains really hate change. So the antidote for that is to give our brains consistency. I want you to think back to when you were in school and the summer was coming to an end. I don't know in your homes, but let me tell you what happened in mine. I would spend all summer waking up whenever I felt like it, then making myself some cereal, throwing on some flip-flops, getting on my bike, going all over the neighborhood, kind of like a feral cat, yard to yard to yard. And then I'd come back when the sun was going down and then stay up late and do it all over again the next day. But every year without fail, something started to happen about 2 weeks out from school. The alarm clock would go off. My mom would come in, I would make my bed, I would get dressed, she would make a breakfast. Instead of just getting on my bike and running around the neighborhood, I would have to read a book because this book was going to be discussed at school, and I'd have to do some consistent things. Bedtime started creeping back a little bit and a little bit. And now I know she was preparing me for school, and she was preparing herself and her home for school. And we do this for children because we think these poor kids, their tiny little child brains can't handle immediate change without warning. But the truth is, our amazing adult brains can't handle change without warning. So it's just pure torture if you're planning to wait for the big reentry announcement and then get your schedule and your consistency pulled together. Just know that's going to be really hard on your brain. You can opt to do it that way, but you can also start giving your brain a little bit more of what it wants by building some consistency in now. All right, so let's take a closer look at what consistency might look like. For individuals, it's definitely shoring up your morning and evening routines. It's going outside and getting natural light and darkness. That actually helps with your circadian rhythms. I have to tell you, I am still regularly having coaching conversations with my clients where they're telling me that they can go 7 or more days without ever stepping outside of their homes. So just walking outside and exposing yourself to natural daylight or natural darkness starts to reset your body. It looks like being a little bit more accountable and keeping promises to yourself. And I'm not talking about all the work stuff. I'm talking about the promises that you've made to yourself for things that you want to do or things that you want to accomplish that you've backburnered so you can take care of everyone else in your life and take care of work. It's starting to really honor those for yourself again. And it's also doing the same things for the little people in your lives. And don't forget your pets. I actually think when we all start leaving our houses more and going into the office again, we're going to see some pet anxiety. And that's tough on them. And it's also tough on humans because you're going to start coming home. If you don't start leaving your pets and letting them get used to being alone, you might come home to shoes being torn up and houses being destroyed. So consider that. On the organizational level, it's starting to talk to your team about professional development. If you had to put a pause on lunch and learns and webinars and different professional development things, starting to discuss the future and how that's going to look when we get back into the normal swing of things is actually going to signal to people's brains to start turning on into consistency and routine. You could start doing strategy sessions around things. How are we going to bring this back, or how are we going to keep this going? And I think, again, strategy is a way to let our brains know there's a future in this organization and we're headed toward it. You want to start with your wellness and your engagement programs, beef those up now, and don't wait for reentry to implement them. If you're going to offer support in the wellness space for people when they are re-entering back into, quote, their normal work routines, go ahead and start offering them now. That will help them prepare. And certainly, as you're getting closer, you are probably going to need to do a little bit of retraining, re-onboarding, and conversations about what reentry success looks like. And again, that's building in some consistency. Now, a side note, don't do all of these things all at once. That will overload everybody's brains, including yours. Pick 1 or 2 of them and put them in place. These are just very subtle ways to build consistency into our brains and into our bodies as well. And with that, let's talk about awareness. So I think this is one of the mega tools we've really had to develop and really focus on throughout this whole situation, because we have not had the ability to be in the room with each other and to feel each other's energy and really see full body language and see facial expression up close. So we've actually had to work on becoming more aware. And I predict this is going to really be something we have to lean into during reentry. So when all of this started and I was giving a bunch of presentations to organizations about how to human through a pandemic, I shared this. Yes, we're all in the same pandemic together, but we're all experiencing it differently. So we're in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. So when you think about it in terms of reentry, it would be that we're in the same harbor. And Jenny, you can flip that slide if you want. Thank you. We're in the same harbor, but we're still in different boats. And also, we've come from different parts of the storm. So some of us have just been on the outer edges of this storm. It has impacted us, but it has not really gotten deeply into our everyday lives, and it has not impacted us at the same level as someone who might have been in the eye of the storm. So some of us are going to show up for reentry pulling into harbor in mega yachts with nice tans and a wine glass with some yacht rock playing. And some of us are going to be exhausted, like rowing in rowboats or floating in on driftwood with kids and parents and pets hanging off of us. And we have to understand we have been in the same storm, but we have had very different experiences. We have to be aware of that during reentry and our friend groups, in our organizations, and in our families. So as you're thinking about that, I want you to think about the great Brene Brown's explanation of what I just talked about. It's all about perspective. Our perspectives are going to be different because perspective is the function of our experience. So when you show up into reentry, whatever that ends up looking like for you, you're going to engage with people who have very different perspectives of what we all just went through. And you have to be really, really aware of that. So one of the ways that we work on awareness and we really support the people around us is by exercising empathy. And so let's take a look. Oh, sorry, I was trying to go off memory there. Let me just tell you one more thing. Oh, no, sorry, Jenny, you can go back. So one other thing I really want to point out is over the last year, organizations asked their employees to welcome work into their humanness, to welcome work via Zoom into their bedrooms because they have nowhere else to work, or their living rooms, to let us see you in your athleisure with your hair in a ponytail with kids in your lap. And we've said it's okay. It's okay for us to see our human. We have to absolutely remember we're going to bring our human back to work. I have seen so many cultures that have these great culture statements about work-life balance and we're all people, and it's so well intended, but the undercurrent culture, you know, the one that we all really live by, not the one that's on our wall, the real culture of organizations, I've seen so many where before this pandemic, it was, we say we care, but you're really going to check your humanness at the elevator at 8 and you can pick it back up on the way out at 5. Don't bring your sadness in, don't bring your grief in, don't bring your personal problems in. Pick it up on the way back out, come in and work. We are humans and we are no longer going to be able to ask people to check it out the door because we invited our organizations into each other's humanness. So we have to be really aware of that going into this. We're going to see some human moments in the office. And I actually have to tell you, that's not a bad thing. A lot of research is pointing toward things like emotional intelligence and vulnerability and empathy as being the strongest leadership tools and culture building tools we can develop. This is not a bad thing. We just need to be prepared for it. Okay, now we can move forward, Jenny. So back to language. We talked about new normal. As we're thinking about this, we need to be aware. So we need to be aware of things like normal, new normal. We also need to be aware of things like unprecedented, uncertain, and trying times. It's absolutely true, but I want you to think about this when you're talking to people about reentry. Watch your language, because if you're saying it's okay, come in, but these are really uncertain times, that doesn't instill a lot of confidence. So I just want you to be really careful with that. I also encourage you to be really careful about the good vibes only language. I'm such a good vibes only person. I love it. But I also say good vibes and here's what I mean by that. If you're getting into reentry and it's be positive, put a smile on, aren't you so glad you're out of your house? You know, look on the bright side. That can be very frustrating for people, because what that is actually saying is, hey, what you're feeling is actually not okay and it's shameful, and don't bring that in here. Don't bring that to our dinner party. Don't feel it. We're telling people what they're feeling isn't right and that they should only feel happy that we've re-entered. And the truth is, some people are going to be really uncomfortable and some people actually preferred being at home. So we need to be really, really careful about it. It's not good vibes only. It's all emotions all the time. They're all okay. All right, so we're going to watch our language as a big piece of awareness. We're going to come in knowing all of the studies are showing that we've had really big changes to mental health status during this time period. Organizations, I think, are going to, this is why I say you need to look at your wellness and your support programs. We need to be aware of that. And we need to, as I said, think about that. I want you to balance people and policy. I love my HR and legal colleagues. They prevent chaos in organizations. We have to balance the people side with the policy. So we're going to enhance employee support if we can, even if it's just something like this. And listen, make sure you're training your people managers about signs and things to look for when it comes to emotional wellness and physical wellness at work. They didn't sign up to do that, but they're going to be on the front lines. They're going to be the ones seeing and they already have been seeing and hearing things. And people managers are still very confused about what they're allowed to say and what they're allowed to ask and what they're allowed to do. So give those people that training. I would say give everyone that training if you can afford to do it. All right. So some predictions when it comes to what we need to be aware about. We need to be really aware that it doesn't matter when reentry happens. Some of us are going to be ready and many of us will not. It doesn't matter when we do it. We could do it today or 2 years from now. That's what's going to happen. For those of us who are ready to go back into work or start engaging differently in our lives, there's going to be layered levels of comfort. I might be comfortable going into my office of 10 people and not at all comfortable going back to my road warrior status and traveling all the time. And we have to understand and be aware of that. Socialization might be slow to return. You might find that people are comfortable doing certain things and not others. So your closest friend at work may not want to start grabbing lunches with you right out of the gate. That doesn't mean anything. It's that we might be a little bit slow to return. Our energy is going to ebb and flow, and 100%, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes as organizations, and we're going to make mistakes as people. We're going to say the wrong things and do the wrong things and have to make apologies and amends and figure it out as we go along, because we're really dealing with a whole bunch of human right now. All right. And then with that, let's just keep in mind the overarching message here is this is not a light switch. There's not going to be, a big message that goes out worldwide that says, everything's open and the light switch has been switched and it all just works perfectly. Plan for challenges. Be flexible and make adjustments. The one thing I really want you to think about when it comes to reentry is that nothing has gone wrong. If things go a little awry or off plan, nothing's gone wrong because we knew this was going to happen. We knew this was going to be challenging. We were going to have to be flexible. That will really support you along the way. All right. More empathy is required. This is your ability to see beyond yourself, to consider someone else's perspective or what their boat might look and feel like, what part of the storm they've been in, to just imagine how they feel. Now, I know that you've all seen the iceberg graphic, and I'm going to throw it up for you one more time and just give you some things to consider. When it comes to your work colleagues, you probably are familiar with their work brand. And what I mean by that is how they present themselves professionally. You're probably familiar with how they like to work, their personality, their communication style. You're familiar with whatever they are comfortable and have shared with you about their personal lives. Empathy is really understanding there's a whole bunch underneath that waterline that you may never know. Now, empathy is not pushing people's boundaries and insisting that they take you underneath the waterline and show all of that to you. It's just knowing that it's there and getting really curious in your own mind about how you can show up differently, knowing that we all have a lot under our waterline. So hopefully you've been working on that. You probably have had to work on that because we've probably all driven each other really crazy over the last year. And so empathy is the antidote to that. So I think you're going to really need to lean into that as you're going into reentry. And let's talk about the last point here, self-regulation. So if you're not quite sure what I mean by self-regulation, there's a lot of definitions. I'm going to share mine with you. Self-regulation is a person's ability to be aware of and hopefully choose their thoughts, to process their emotions, to feel them and actually process them, to pause before they take action, and then to ultimately take action that is in service of their long-term best interests and in accordance with their values. Now, if you're not sure what your values are, at the end, I'm going to give you some resources, including a workbook that'll help you determine your values. So I want to introduce you to something called the model. This is a coaching tool that I use, and it's also a great tool to help you kind of look at your brain and to also check on yourself when it comes to regulation. So the model tells us that our thoughts create feelings that make us take action or create inaction, which is actually action, and that creates our results. Most of us think the results we're creating in our conversations and at work in our lives are based on the actions, right? This is why we see people do one diet after the other, because it's like, I need a different action. I need a different action. I need a different action. It actually is about your thoughts and feelings, and that creates your results. So one of the best things you can do for self-regulation is to learn how to reframe your thinking. So when you're able to stop and look at your thoughts and see what your mind is offering you and ultimately choose the thought that serves you best, that is such a valuable tool that will help you cope with any change and any challenge in your life, including reentry. When you're able to reframe your thinking and choose your thoughts, it allows you to see multiple outcomes and realities. I want you to think about this. Your brain is a lot like the dating app Tinder. So, Tinder will give you a person and say, you're a match. And you look at that match and you either swipe right to say, yes, I want to meet this person and talk to them, or swipe left to make them disappear forever and ever, amen. Your brain is serving up thoughts to you as if they're your soulmate thought. Like, here's your match. And most of us are just swiping right on any thought our brain gives us. Like, oh, well, that's got to be true. That's got to be true. Well, that's terrible, but I guess that's my only option. When you learn to reframe your thinking as a part of this, You stop and you question your own brain. This gives you the power of choice. I want to show this to you really quickly in action. So let's look at the model. So the model tells us that circumstances are neutral. So going back to the office is a neutral circumstance. The reason I know it's neutral is some of you are thinking, I can't wait to go back. And some of you are thinking, oh my gosh, that'll be the worst. That's how I know it's neutral. We don't all agree on it. So you take any circumstance and you look at your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and your results. So let's take a look at this. And this is a tool you can use as you're preparing for reentry or doing anything. So when you look at it, and I've got it on the next slide, Jenny, completely pulled out here. So let's take the circumstance of we've been asked to come back into the office. My thought might be, oh, I need flexibility. And of course, there's no way I'm going to get it. They're never flexible with me. My boss hates me. That thought might make me feel mad, anxious, defeated, disappointed, concerned. And those feelings might actually make me go, oh, I'm not even going to ask because I already know the answer's no. So I just accept that I'm not going to have any flexibility. And so my result that I create for myself is I ensure 100% they're not going to give me any flexibility because I talk myself out of even having the conversation. That is how our brains and our feelings, when we're not regulating, can take us down a path. With that one thought, I allowed myself to go all the way from getting information to deciding it's a non-starter for me and I'm going to absolutely make sure I get no flexibility. Another way you could look at it, though, is the same circumstance. We've been asked to go back into the office, but you could think differently. I need flexibility and there's no harm in asking. We've been really flexible over the last year. Now, when I think about that thought, I feel a little more hopeful, a little more willing, and a little more open to possibility. So maybe that makes me take the action of discussing my needs and making a request of my supervisor. And then the result I've given myself is a chance to actually have a flexible schedule. I see this over and over again where people aren't regulating their thoughts and their feelings, and they're taking opportunities and chances and power away from themselves. So this is a really great tool you can use. The best way and easiest way to look at it is to just imagine you're telling yourself a story. So if you look at this next slide, just think about it like this. The story I'm telling myself is this, and another version of the story could be this. So the first story was definitely going to ensure I got no flexibility. And I could come up with multiple different versions that might serve me better. And then I get to pick which thought I swipe right on. All right. So with that, let's talk about another way we can get into this reframing. There's a bunch of questions you can really ask yourself. What's another version of the story? Is there another way I can look at this? What are my feelings? What are my thoughts? How true is this thought for me? Is there any evidence that I can see that actually proves this thought is true? Or maybe is there evidence that I see that shows me this thought might not be true? What am I learning about myself and the situation based on the way I'm thinking? And how is this thinking serving me? I really feel like this is going to help people during reentry because we're going to be going through a lot of change and have a lot of nerves and anxiety going in. So learning to really look at your thoughts is going to serve you very well. Now, we want to process those emotions, and I love box breathing. So box breathing is actually a tactical breathing exercise. It's used in military and tactical situations. It's a great way to actually process your emotions and re-regulate your nervous system. So the way, and you can do this in front of anyone and they won't know you're doing it. The way you do it is you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and breathe out for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. So there's a lot of research that shows our bodies on a neurological, physiological level process an emotion in just 90 seconds. That's how long it takes an emotion to go through our body. So anything beyond 90 seconds is usually based on what we're thinking and that we're kind of hanging out with that. So when you're feeling really, really in your emotions about something and you're ready to pop that email off or storm out of the meeting or storm into this, if you do this just 6 times, that gives you actually 90 plus 6 additional seconds, that can really regulate your system and allow you to make a choice based on a conscious thought, fully processed emotions, and you'll make a choice that's going to serve your highest purpose more often than not. I think we're going to need to do a lot of this as we're navigating and creating new agreements. All right. So with that, my friends, the last thing I want to tell you is cut yourself and everyone else some slack, just as you have been doing. I said before, the lie is that reentry is going to be super fun, super easy, and it's just going to all go perfectly. So really manage your expectations of yourself and give yourself as much care and compassion as you're giving others empathy. Don't seek perfection. If you are trying to do this perfectly, good luck. Just do it. Consistency beats perfection every time. Action and movement beats waiting for perfect every time. Finally, get help when needed. If you're struggling to self-regulate as you're going back into the real world, I want you to know that is a great time to reach out for help. Whether you're going through your EAP program, you're seeing a therapist, you're working with a coach, that is a great time. You might not be able to self-regulate the way you used to. And don't feel like you can't go and get help. All right, so cut yourself a lot of slack. We're headed into a whole new situation and our brains are going to have to adjust. With that, my friends, are you ready for re-entry? So I've gone through these 5 things with you today, and Jenny, thank you so much for being the slide master for me. I'm gonna leave you with 10 questions to ask yourself, your family, and your organizations that will really help you kind of shape all of this up. The first is, what is normal? What does that mean to us? And how do we achieve that? What have we learned? What tools do we have that can guide us through re-entry? What's our strategy and who needs to help us create it? Who should know what and when? What does it look like communicating about our re-entry? What are my negotiables and non-negotiables? So what are the things that I'm willing to be flexible about and are the things that are no longer, I'm not going to flex on them. And I have some of those in my life. All right. Next, we're going to look at asking the question, how can I start preparing now? There is no reason to not start preparing now, even if it's just preparing your mind. How are the people around me? What do I need to consider? What do I need to be looking out for? What do I need today? One of my favorite things to ask when I'm stressed due to a lot of change is, what does my mind need today? What does my body need today? And what do I need emotionally today? And pick one and nurture it. So take care of yourself. Am I pausing before acting? Am I giving myself a minute to regulate? Am I asking myself next, what's the next best step? Not the next perfect step, just the next best step. What do I need to take that step? For your organization, your next best step might just be saying, when will we say it's time for reentry? That might be the next best step. And then you just say, all right, well, then we need to have that conversation. Or who should be on our reentry planning team? Okay, then that's the next step. Who do we need to ask? So that's just 10 quick questions to get you started. And I just saw the question. Absolutely, you can have these slides. I think this would be a great thing to walk your team through, your members through. Feel free. And so with that, thank you so much. I have put together a page for you all on my website, causecollaboration.com/PJ Brigade. It's going to have my core values workbook on it, a reframing workbook to help you kind of jot down your thoughts and some different thoughts you might be able to try on for size and ultimately pick some. If you want to put some habit back in your life and give your brain the consistency it's craving, I've got a habit tracker. And then obviously, if you're looking for checklists from CDC or SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management, of which I'm a member, they've got great information. Lots of hotlines, social resources, and of course, resources for the little people in your lives. So that is your webpage on my site. Go and take advantage of it. And with that, I want to thank you all so much for your time and your chats in the chat box. And I would love to answer any questions or have conversation with you all.
Thank you, Erin.
You're so welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. For those of you who feel comfortable speaking up, please do. You're certainly welcome to unmute yourself, or if you'd like to pop some commentary in the chat, that would be wonderful as well.